Jazzcast Pros.
When I got sober, I did not think I'd ever be a federal judge, right? I mean, my first professional goal was really, let's not get fired again. For whatever reason, meth fit me biochemically the best. I mean, I had gone through pills, downers, some uppers, gone through hallucinogens, gone through weed. But once I found meth, it was just like that perfect fit. And I really had a strong preference for it, and I pursued it much more heavily.
This is episode 182. Have you ever wondered how someone can rise from the depths of addiction and trauma to achieve not only personal recovery, but also a career of remarkable impact? In today's episode, we're diving into Mary Beth's powerful story of resilience and transformation.
But it really is an example of that incremental movement forward. 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law School. At 39 years old, I graduated law school when I was 42. And then I worked at a big law firm, and then I did class action work for the federal government. And at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal judge.
You'll discover the tools she used to rebuild her life and how embracing multiple paths to recovery can lead to lasting change. Hello, Fearless Warriors. Welcome to Fearless Fridays with Maryann, the podcast where real talk meets real transformation. I am your host, Dr. Maryann Rivera-Dannert, and with over 10 years as a life coach, author, speaker, and trainer, I will be guiding you on this journey of healing, growth, and empowerment. Each week, we dive into raw, authentic conversations about life's challenges, victories, and everything in between. Together, we'll hear your inner child, build unshakable confidence, and unlock the fearless you that's been waiting to shine. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's take the next step towards the life that you deserve. This is your safe space, your community, and your call to be limitless, because it's time to be free, fearless, and fabulous. Hello, Mary Beth. So I've said your name. So tell us a little bit more about you besides what's going to be in your bio.
I grew up in Central Jersey. That I don't think is usually in my bio. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now. I came to go to Berkeley for college, and I just never left. So there's that. Let's see. I've been with my husband for 40 years. It makes me sound old, but we did just have our anniversary. I'm retired now, which probably is in the bio, but it's sort of a very joyful time of life to be able to really focus on doing the things I want to do and be of service to the recovery community in a new way. So those are a couple things that probably you wouldn't have mentioned.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. And congratulations on 40 years of marriage. And I'll be circling back to that in a little while. So from junkie to judge. Let's go back to the beginning. You started drinking at the age of 12.
Yes.
So what was going on in your life that led to you to start experimenting, drinking at the age of 12? And then you got involved with methamphetamines. Then you started shooting drugs at the age of 17. Take us back to the beginning and where you are today.
I think that's exactly the right question, because excessive drug use in a young, person at early teens and earlier, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? There is a history there. And I do show that in my book. I wanted to show what led up to it. And for me, it was unfortunately a common story, which is that it was really parental neglect and parental abuse that were the primary sort of impetuses to make drugs attractive. So my mother wasn't really connected to me or focused on me. She could be violent sometimes. And for the first 6 years we lived with her first husband, and he was a nice guy. But then she left him, divorced him. I lived with a great grandmother for 3 years. And then when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and he was very violent with my mother. He was physically, sexually violent with me. It was just a very high stress household where I didn't know what was going to happen, where I had little control over what would happen to me. Witnessing one parent be violent against another, I think it's underappreciated how traumatic that is as well. And so all of that just really primed me to, notice the great relief of alcohol. I mean, when I was 12 and I had my first, alcohol experience, which was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine, which a lot of people know.
I remember.
Yeah, most people remember, But what captured my attention was how much better I felt. I felt like I could, like my muscles were looser, like I was sort of giggling in a more honestly joyful way. And that made me want more because it was a positive experience.
Yeah. And the thing about it is obviously we don't realize that in the moment is, hindsight. Yes, you do feel good for that moment, but then the problems are still there. And that led for you to start going into other avenues. And how did methamphetamines get into the picture?
So this is around 1977, and I was again in Central Jersey, and it was really the first wave of like readily available meth. I mean, meth had existed, but it wasn't widespread, at least not in my part of the country. At the time I thought happy to find that there was this big, easily accessible meth wave. And for whatever reason, meth fit me biochemically the best. I mean, I had gone through pills, downers, some uppers, gone through hallucinogens, gone through weed, and I was doing those things somewhat. But once I found meth, it was just like that perfect fit. And I really had a strong preference for it, and I pursued it much more heavily. But it's also, I was overusing the other drugs. There were chaotic experiences, challenging experiences, but meth really escalated the impact. I mean, it's a very toxic drug. And when you stay up for days at a time, that alone has a big impact on your mental health, on your physical health, on the kind of risks you're taking to get your drugs and the people you're around. So it was a quick escalation, and I was shooting meth by 17 and in full bore addiction by the time I graduated high school.
So you were still in school while this was all going on?
Yes, I was in school, and I had always done well at school. School had always been my one positive special place where I got a lot of attention. And so I was able to handle school until toward the end of my senior year of high school. There was starting to be more of an impact because I was missing a lot of school. But, I went to college, and by the time my grades started suffering a bit, I had already been accepted to college. And so when I left to come to California for college, I did better with the drugs for a couple of years, but it didn't last. And in January of my senior year of college, in part due to some sexual assaults, a violent boyfriend, I started using meth again on a regular basis. And I didn't get sober till 32. So that's sort of the drug trajectory.
Wow. So going back, through all of this, was there ever any reconciliation with your mother? Did that relationship ever, turn out to be the way that you desired?
No, I learned sort of by absorbing from a young age that my mother wasn't really focused on me. I wouldn't have necessarily phrased it that way at the time, but I certainly felt alone, like I didn't have anywhere to turn. And that was really a bigger issue when the violence with my stepfather happened. I knew that there was nobody who was going to help me out of this. And plus he was abusive with her too. But even once I got sober, and my mother and I interacted with my mother until she died, but we never were close. And it wasn't so much about her behavior in my childhood. It's that she really never changed. And so she wasn't able to really ever be supportive. She wasn't really ever particularly connected to me or bonded to me, but I did interact with her until she died. So I had something of a relationship with her.
Yeah. And in school, did anyone ever notice, what was going on? Because, alcohol is one thing, but meth, like you said, it changes you physically. I mean, alcohol does too, but meth is like a whole nother thing. Did anyone ever, question or anything like that?
I mean, when I started missing school at the end of my senior year, I think one or two teachers asked me what was going on, and I was losing like a lot of weight. I was really looking exhausted and gray, but I just said I was having problems at home. And because I had been such a good student for such a long time, I just don't think they were expecting it. And so they didn't directly ask me about drug use. They didn't really bring that up, but there was one or two teachers who expressed concern about me missing. Suddenly I'm missing a lot of school. Suddenly my grades are dropping a little.
Yeah. So you managed to get into college, but you still struggled. You started drinking at the age of 12, using drugs up to the age of 32. So 2 decades of alcohol and drug abuse.
Yes.
What was the turning point? At what point did you say, okay, Mary Beth, this is enough. Something has to change.
Well, I will say that for many of us, it's not that clear cut. So
right.
So what happened for me was that there were a lot of things were hitting me at the same time. So, for example, I couldn't hold a job anymore. I mean, I couldn't get to work. I was losing jobs, very quickly. If I held them for 6 months, or that was, a relatively long time, I was just physically debilitated, emotionally devastated. I felt trapped, and my partner, now husband, was ready to throw me out. And so it was sort of everything together together that made me say, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab. But I did not go to rehab thinking I'm definitely getting sober or, I'm going to change my life. I didn't actually believe it was possible for me to stop. I just thought maybe I can figure out how to do better, like how to do less. So it's common that people have to work their way towards a belief that they can actually get sobriety and then do the work that will allow them to develop the skills so that they can maintain it.
Yeah. And you created a individual, recovery plan. So walk us through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, when I went to rehab and it's in 93, I was told that 12 steps was the only option. That's, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the Anonymous.
Right.
And that's a good fit for some people, but it wasn't the right fit for me. And so even in 93, I pulled a couple ideas from 12 steps, but I also found Women for Sobriety, which still exists. I found the Parent Organization for Smart Recovery and the Parent Organization for Life-Free Secular Recovery, which I'm on the board for. And so what I did was, I read all the books for all the programs. I went to meetings for all the programs, but and rehab taught me certain things that were useful, but I was always viewing myself as the decision maker in my recovery plan. And so, I was listening during the cigarette break during a meeting. If people talked about strategies or techniques, I was absorbing it and I was always thinking, is this a technique I think will help me, and sort of filtering it like that. And today we would call that a personal plan or a patchwork plan. Those terms didn't exist when I got sober in 94, but today more people take that approach than did then. And I will say I just had 30 years of continuous sobriety, so I think I built a pretty robust platform.
Yeah, and that's amazing too. Congratulations on that also, and I think that, and you can speak obviously more to this, but as someone who has struggled also personally with alcohol and experimented with drugs in my, early teenage years, I had heard that once an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. Once a drug addict, you're always a drug addict. Number one, what's your take on that? And then also, do you start from the beginning, or do you start from where you left off? If you're someone that has, that's been in recovery and then you get back into it.
So, there is some actually good data about who gets sober. And today we say sober for all drugs, like, being off meth is sober, right?
Okay.
And I know a lot of people hear these data points, like only 10% of the people succeed or 15%. And those data are usually in each effort, but in their lifetime, about 75% of the people who at one point had an addiction, which today we call a substance use disorder, 75% of them will eventually recover. So it's not such a situation of despair or hopelessness as sometimes people are told. And then as far as where to start, this is an important question, especially for newcomers. And so for me, you have to start where you are. So let's just say professionally. I had a Berkeley degree and good grades and an embarrassing resume from the past 10 years, right? I got sober and I was not going to get hired for a professional career job. Like nobody was going to hire me, but I wasn't ready either. My first job when I got home from rehab was a part-time, temporary, low-level administrative job, because for me to get up and go to work every day on time and stay all the hours I was supposed to be there and do a good job and do it the next day and the next, I hadn't done that. I needed practice. I sort of needed to build up those skills. And so I do think, and when I talk to newcomers, I emphasize it's important to be realistic about where you are. But also, for most of us, we have to prioritize. And so, for example, my life was broken in many, many, many ways. Well, I couldn't start working on that whole list right from the beginning. I had to pick. I picked 5 things to work on because the list was too long. And so part of your early recovery plan often involves making priorities. What do I need to work on first? What are the 3 or the 5 things where I need to focus on now? Those other things, I recognize they need work, but they have to wait. They have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for elaborating on that. So substance use disorder is something that you talk about. So for somebody that's in the workforce and is struggling, what are some tips, some advice that you can give to that individual in their conversation with their employer?
First of all, if you're going in for treatment for a substance use disorder, you are actually protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so they really do have to allow you, they have to have a conversation with you and accommodate you in a reasonable way. Just like they'd have to reasonably accommodate you if you had another kind of disability. Now, don't get me wrong, that can be a challenge sometimes to get them to see it that way. And so it's always an important decision for people as to what they disclose to their employer and what they don't. But the other side of that I'll say is not everybody needs to go to inpatient treatment. So many people can start getting help and still go to work and still live at home. There are options like intensive outpatient programs, which happen usually 3 nights a week for 2 or 3 hours. So you can live at home and go to your job. There are therapists who specialize in addiction or doctors who can get you medication. There are recovery coaches you can hire to help you through the process. And there are, of course, peer support groups like 12 Steps and LifeRing and others that are free and available in your community and or online. So it's not always necessary for everyone to inform their employer. Often you can avoid it if you're not going for inpatient care. And it is an important choice about when and if to tell your employer, because sometimes they don't understand that substance use disorder is a medical condition. They may have, judgments around it or view it as some kind of a issue about your character rather than the health condition that it is. So those are some things to know as far as what you might or might not want to say to your employer.
So you mentioned that when you first started into recovery, that you realized that AA wasn't for you. How did you realize that? Because somebody, that might be listening, they might be like, oh, I've tried that before and the same thing. So how did you realize that?
Yeah, so I'll preface it with this. It's not that all the people of faith go to the 12 steps, which has that higher power requirement, and all the people without faith go to the other options, which usually don't require a higher power. There are a lot of atheists and agnostics that can make 12 steps work, and there are a lot of religious and spiritual people in the other groups because they like the approach for reasons other than higher power. And so what I tell newcomers is, well, for me, I read the big book and I looked at the steps and it just wasn't the right approach. I didn't really believe in a higher power, but also turning your will and your life over, that wasn't a comfortable idea for me. The powerless wasn't a comfortable idea. A lot of people don't like the sponsors. Some people love sponsors, but a lot of people aren't comfortable with it in 12 steps. 12 steps is very specific. You do these steps in this order. The other programs tend to have more flexibility and more focus on you as an individual. So some people are going to like one approach and some another. So for newcomers, I tell them just do the research. I had to go to the library because there was no Google. Okay. But today they can do the research. And so if I was a newcomer and I was looking at the peer support, what's the right fit? I would look at 12 steps. I would look at LifeRing. I would look at SMART. I would look at Women for Sobriety, Recovery Dharma, and She Recovers. Those are the 6 largest, but there are also other options. But even those 6, if you read the philosophy and the meeting formats really vary a lot. One or two of them will typically sound like it's, the right fit, that it's philosophically the right fit, or that format sounds better. And the other thing is you don't have to pick just one. You can do more than one program. So if you're finding some benefit in AA, let's say, but you're interested in finding out what the other programs have to offer, you can do that. You can do both. And so it's really up to you to find what's the right balance of different ideas for you.
What about also incorporating therapy, especially because, you experience a lot of trauma? How did therapy play a role, or if it did or didn't, in your life?
Yeah. So when I got home from rehab, I always knew that my violence history, my abuse history, what today we would call trauma, I always knew that was underneath my drug use. And so when I got home from rehab, I knew that I needed a therapist with expertise in that area. And so I searched for one, and I really interviewed them. You have expertise with this. Here's my history. And so that was really critically important and necessary for me. And I'll say I was in mental health therapy for my PTSD, which I didn't even know I had, which for me showed up as severe anxiety. I was in therapy for much longer than it took me to get my substances under control. And that's typical. But also, you're right. Many people, when they're getting sober, they have a trauma history or they have other mental health conditions to be addressed. And today it's called dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorder. So you can look at treatment plans and ask them if they have dual diagnosis expertise. But many of us do combine therapy and or mental health medications and our substance use treatment at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. And then you went on to become a federal judge. So tell us about that journey.
Well, one thing I will say is that when I got sober, I did not think I'd ever be a federal judge, right? I mean, my first professional goal was really, let's not get fired again. That was my professional goal. But it really is an example of that incremental movement forward, right? So my first job, as I said, was that part-time temporary job. And then my second job was a mid-level permanent full-time job. And then I got a job as a supervisor at a larger company and I got a promotion. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law School. At 39 years old, I graduated law school when I was 42. And then I worked at a big law firm, and then I did class action work for the federal government. And at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal judge. So it's not like this was an initial goal or this was what I was shooting for. It's really was about what's the right next step? What job do I want next? And what do I need to do to prepare myself so I can get that next job? And then step by step by step. It's amazing how far you can go in 3 or 5, but definitely in 20 years by just taking that approach.
And something that you said is very key, and I want people to be able to hone in on that, is that you became a federal judge at the age of 42.
No, a federal judge at the age of 53. I finished law school at 42.
So you finished at 42, became a federal judge at 53.
Yes.
So for the individual that feels life has passed me by, it's too late, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too fill in the blank, what would you say to that individual?
I think that life is longer than we think sometimes. There are many future opportunities. And look, I also became a published author when I was 62 years old, so there are a lot of future possibilities. I think it's really about, figuring out what do I want and then how can I work that in? And sometimes there are a lot of different goals that we're interested in and we have to sort of fine tune them with time. But many of us make professional or life changing, altering decisions in the middle of life or even towards our senior citizen status, which I guess I am right now. I'm over 60. And the truth is that for me, it keeps life interesting. I mean, I like new challenges. I like to stretch my mind in new ways. I mean, even writing the memoir. Okay? I mean, I was an excellent legal writer, but a memoir is written like a novel. I didn't know how to write like that. So I took classes, memoir writing classes, even novel classes, like how to, write a good scene or how to write dialogue. I enjoy all that. It's stretching my brain in new ways. It's challenging to figure out something new. So, I mean, unless you're 80, you are not beyond the point where you can, change your job or at least, start working on something as a hobby, as a side project, which is how I started my writing.
I love that. So you've already kind of started, the conversation about your memoir. What led you to say, I need to share my story publicly?
Yeah. So when I was appointed a judge, it was really sort of a natural reflection time. Like, how the heck did I do this? I was shooting meth for 17 until 32. Yeah. And so I started thinking about, could my story be of use? And so then I thought, well, if I'm thinking of writing a memoir, I should go read some memoir, right? So I did that. And what I noticed was a lot of memoirs, they start with the crazy stories of the drug use. They don't really show where it came from. And so I wanted to show where it came from. And then I do have the drug use stories, but then the last third of my book is my first 3 years of recovery. Because most memoirs at the end, it's sort of like I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And it's like, right. Well, that's not how recovery works, right? So I go through the 3 years about building the individual plan, about decisions I was making, strategies I was using, but also that trauma, substance use recovery interplay. And so I didn't see that book out there in the marketplace about doing an individual plan or doing the structure that I thought would be helpful. So I decided to write the book, and it's been a very rewarding experience as well. Yeah.
I love that. So you have been married for 40 years.
I've been with my husband for 40 years. Yeah. Okay. The marriage state's a little different. We have been together for 40 years. Yes.
Okay. So what keeps it going?
when I went into rehab, my husband was done with me. Okay. And so for those of you who are in that position, he was really done. Like he just couldn't take it anymore. So when I did not know if we were going to survive that. And in rehab, they do these friend and family sessions usually. And he came and he'd say, I don't think I'm ever getting over this. It's too late, But he did let me come home from rehab and sort of like waited and to see what was going to happen,
Right.
whether I was going to get well or not. And so, but we at that point did have to go into couples counseling because we had a lot of frustrations on both parts, a lot of pain. We weren't great communicators. And so we did couples counseling for, 3 or 4 years. It was a while, to really be able to learn to hear each other and listen and communicate better. But also, once I was sober, I was able to be an actual partner to my husband, in a way that I couldn't be when I was on drugs. I was able to be fair, to take, to listen to him, to take into consideration his concerns or his viewpoint. We could negotiate, issues in a new way. And so eventually, hopefully in a good marriage, you get to the point where you're sort of each other's best friend as well. Your goal is to be fair to both parties and to reach the decisions that are going to be in the best interest of both of you. In other words, you're not just self-serving, but you're really looking at the long term. But part of it was learning how to talk and how to listen.
Very important. So how are you healing your inner child?
So when I got home from rehab, I did individual therapy with a trauma specialist, and I was on mental health meds for a couple years as well. And then I went off. And then I think at about the third year of therapy, she put me in group therapy with other women with trauma histories. And that was like a whole new level of understanding and healing for me because they were further along in the healing process than I was, and I was able to learn from them. So I stopped doing therapy after about 9 years, and I've gone back twice because there was some kind of a crisis, but not long term. So a lot of my healing happened then. But when I was writing the book, it actually opened up some new areas of healing as well, because I was looking at things in depth that I hadn't really looked at for a long time. So for example, I had this really bad kidnapping and like 6-hour rape by 3 men in college. And there was a decision I made during that process that I had always second guessed myself on. Why didn't I do this? And when I was writing the book, it really became clear to me that my decision at the time was correct. Like I wasn't going to be able to do what my fantasy mind said I should have done. It wasn't going to happen. I chose correctly. And that was sort of a freeing of that kind of self-judgment. And so the book definitely helped me release some shame or second guessing. It increased my understanding of my younger self a little bit more too, really viewing her with maybe a little bit more sympathy and understanding than I had.
Yeah, a little bit more compassion to yourself too.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So what's going on with your business? What are you looking forward to? What do you have coming up?
So I am retired, although my husband says I need to look it up in the dictionary because I don't know what it means. But because I am retired is why I can talk about my story in this open way now. So it's really freed me to be of service in a new way. And so right now I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation. I'm on the advisory council for the Higher Calling Foundation. And then I have my book out. I promote the book, but I do a lot of speaking and educating. I do workshops. I speak at conferences. I speak at like fundraisers for community organizations. And then I'm on, podcasts. I've done some television and radio. I write opinion pieces like for the Wall Street Journal and LA Times and others. And those are all on my website, which is junkietojudge.com. So right now it's really about balancing, I feel useful in supporting my recovery, peers, my community in a new way. But at the same time, I do have to balance that against, I am retired and I need to have some time off and spend more time with my husband and my friends. But it's been a joyful time to really be of service in a new way. I'll tell you, I use that judge title right now as sort of an ear opener, and so I'll train people like literally what is substance use disorder? And like we talked about, what are the treatment options? And with 30 years of sobriety and a former judge, I think it helps them be reassured about the possibility for their loved ones getting well, but also helps them listen and learn from the things that I think are important information for me to share.
So you are on the Fearless Fridays podcast. How are you living a fearless life?
I think it's not stretching myself, being open to trying new things and putting myself out there. And I will say that, announcing that you used to shoot meth for 20 years, some people aren't happy with that.
Yeah.
So it's not, there were some trolls and there's some, negative feedback. But, for me, the fearless side is about really being my true full self, almost really for the first time, definitely for the first time publicly. And that it was a bit of a risk, but it was really necessary if I was going to be of service in the way that I hope to be of service.
Yeah, I love that. So you said that your current memoir only goes up to 3 years into recovery. So is there going to be a part 2?
I don't know. I mean, a book is a major undertaking, and so it may be that my time is better used by doing this type of speaking and writing shorter pieces, like writing opinion pieces or essays. I actually just had a poem published. I'm not really a poet. I had a poem published last week, so I don't think I'll do another book. But never say never. I may have a great idea tomorrow and decide, that that's the right next step for me.
I love that. And one more time, where can our individuals connect with you, learn more about you, and purchase a copy of your book?
So the book, again, is From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. It's on Amazon and all the usual sites, and bookstores have it or can get it. My website, junkietoJudge.com, has a lot of information, and people can message me through my website. So if I can be of use in any way, any opportunities, feel free to message me. And then I am on Twitter. I don't argue with people on Twitter, but I do share information. So I'll share like the new studies that come out about substance use or recovery, or articles, and my recovery thoughts. And I'm at Mary Beth O _.
I love that. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your journey with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please leave us a 5-star review and share with a friend or two. If you aren't already following us on social media, please connect with me on LinkedIn at Maryann Rivera-Dannert, or visit our website, MaryanNRivera-Dannert.com. I will catch you next week with a brand new episode, and remember that you are a priority and you matter.